Karl Shapiro is a poet I have always liked. He is essentially, I think, a critic of the age he lived in, a magnificent ironist. He never wastes a word, and he very accurately and very acutely painted a portrait of the superficiality of the society which surrounded him. Especially, I think, in this poem, his most famous and his best, The Dome of Sunday. With focus sharp as Flemish painted face, in film of varnish brightly fixed, and through a polished hand lens deeply seen, Sunday at noon, through hyaline thin air, sees down the street, and in the camera of my eye depicts row houses and row lives, glass after glass, door after door the same, face after face the same, the brutal visibility the same, as if one life emerging from one house would pause, a single image caught between two facing mirrors where vision multiplies beyond perspective. A silent clatter in the high-speed eye, spinning out photo-circulars of sight. I see slip to the curb the long machines, out of whose warm and windowed rooms pirouette, shellacked with light and silk, the hard legs of our women. Our women are one woman, dressed in black, the carmine-printed mouth and cheeks as soft as muslin glass belong outright to one dark dressy man, merely a swagger at her curvy side. This is their visit to themselves. All day, from porch to porch, they weave a nonsense pattern through the even glare, stealing in surfaces cold, vulgar glances at themselves. And high up, in the heated room, all day, I wait behind the plate glass pane for one, hot as a voyeur for a glimpse of one, the vision to blot out this woman's sheen. All day my sight records expensively row houses and row lives. But nothing happens. No diagonal with melting shadow falls across the curb. Neither the blinded negress lurching through fatigue, nor exiles bleeding from their pores, nor that bright bomb slipped lightly from its rack to splinter every silvered glass and crystal prism, witch bowl and perfume bottle, and billion candle-powered dressing bulb. No direct hit to smash the shatterproof and lodge at last the quivering needle clean in the eye of one who stands transfixed in fascination of her brightness. University. To hurt the Negro and avoid the Jew is the curriculum. In mid-September, the entering boys, identified by hats, wander in a maze of mannered brick, where boxwood and magnolia brood and columns with imperious stance, like rows of antebellum girls, eye them, outlanders. In whited cells, on lawns equipped for peace, under the arch and lofty banister, equals shake hands, unequals blankly pass. The exemplary weather whispers, "Quiet, quiet," and visitors on tiptoe leave for the raw north, the unfinished west, as the young, detecting an advantage, practice a face. Where, on their separate hills, the colleges, like manor houses of an older law, gaze down embankments on a land in fee. The deans, dry spinsters over family plate, ring out the English names like coin, humour the snob and lure the lout. Within the precincts of this world, poise is a club. But on the neighbouring range, misty and high, the past is absolute. Some luckless race, dull with inbreeding and conformity, wears out its heart, and comes barefoot and bad for charity or jail. The scholar sanctions their obsolete disease, the gentleman revolts with shame at his ancestor, and the true nobleman, once a democrat, sleeps on his private mountain. He was one whose thought was shapely and whose dream was broad. This school he held his art an epitaph, but now it takes him from his name, falls open like a dishonest look, and shows us, rotted and endowed, its senile pleasure. Midnight Show. The year is done. The last act of the vaudeville, the last top hat and patent leather, tappity-tap, enclosed in darkness. Pat, blackout, only the organ groans, its thousand golden throats in love, while blue low light suffuses mysteries of sleep. Through racks of heads and smoothly parts, the gauzy veil that slips, the last pretence of peace into the wings. With raucous crash, the music rises to its feet, and pouring from the hidden eye like God, the light, white molten, cold, fills out the vacant field with shattered cities, striped ships, and maps with lines that crawl, symbols of horror, symbols of obscenity, a girl astride a giant cannon holding a flag, removal of stone and stained glass saints from a known cathedral, and the voice, the loving and faithful pointer, trots beside reel after reel, taking death in its well-trained stride. The voice, the polite, the auctioneer, places his hints like easy bids. The lab assistant, the voice, dips their pity like litmus paper into his rancid heart. Dream to be surfeited, nerves clogged up with messages, and backed up at the ganglion, the news refused. Dream to be out in snow, where every corner Santa, heart of one generation's dreams, tinkles a bell. We know him too. He is the unemployed, but clowns as the giver, receiving pennies in a cast-iron pot. Dreams to be cold with bird at the world's bottom. Dream to be worn in the Vatican, photographing a manuscript. Dream to be there, a cell in Europe's poisoned blood. Revulsion cannot rouse our heads for pride or protest. The eye sees the camera, a clean moronic gaze, and to go is not impossible, but merely careless. O wife, what shall we tell the children that we saw? O son, what shall we tell our father? And O my friend, what shall we tell our senses when the lights go up and noiselessly the golden curtains crash together? I think with Shapiro one gets a sense of a terrible anger, but an anger that Shapiro manages to somehow shape into a very crafted vision, a very ironic vision, a very pointed vision, a very crucially critical vision. And this is something that seems very lacking in poetry now. Poets don't seem prepared to judge. Ezra Pound judged, sometimes with great miscalculation, and T.S. Eliot judged, and Shapiro judged, and I think this is a function of the poet, which is not to amuse, but which is to convey that poet's own personal vision of society, the society he knows or she knows extremely well, and therefore can critique or empathise with an absolute sense of personal narrative knowledge. I think that this is hugely important. The Bible tells us not to judge unless we be judged, but if we have to judge, we must do so in a fair way. And I think this is what, in this kind of poetry, Karl Shapiro judges effectively and critiques our society for its superficiality. No doubt all societies have been superficial in some ways, and it is up to each individual poet to look at his or her own society and register for posterity its shortcomings. I think with Shapiro he saw little of value. I think it is up to the idiosyncratic vision of each poet to say these things are bad and perhaps these things are good. There is a sense, having reached the age of 71, where I remember in my own lifetime thinking this time is particularly bad, and remembering earlier times in my life in the 60s when I thought that life, I was not talking about my own personal life, but life as it is lived by society is very good and very positive. In the 60s we enjoyed an almost untrammelled NHS, an almost untrammelled and untouched welfare state. There were no beggars. The corruption in politics and in business was very, very constrained because of government regulation. People simply could not become multimillionaires because they would be taxed and taxed until they either stopped being greedy or permanently disappeared abroad, like I think Noel Coward did. And I think this is very sad that these days we are in a sense an extension of America, and greed is somehow considered a kind of greatness when it is in fact one of the worst moral failings and causes untold suffering to millions of people. This is perhaps more true in America than in Europe, but those of us here in Britain who remember earlier periods when things were much better than they are, when the poor were not marginalised as they are, they were not demonised as they are. I can see, I wish I had Shapiro's ability to write politically and effectively. It's very difficult to write political poems, very, very difficult. I don't think I've ever managed to write a successful political poem. I've written some which are rejected, and it's very difficult to have this kind of ironic vision which Shapiro has, and which he so wonderfully presents in these poems, which I gain immense joy from reading and from reading aloud, and which I hope more people will actually read. In the Oxford Book of American Verse, the original one by F.O. Matheson, not the later one by a much less good critic. This is the important book to read, and I paid an incredibly low amount of money. I think I paid 1 penny plus postage to buy this on the internet, and it was probably the best money I ever spent, because the book is absolutely marvellous and contains virtually no second-rate writing. It's a concentration of one of the finest academic minds in history.